This evening's webinar is I'm an inclusion coordinator. What now? So I suppose for those of you who don't know me, my name is Claire Butterley and I am the National Coordinator of the LINC programme. I will be presenting the first section or the first part of tonight, which looks at leading inclusive practice and pedagogy. And then Ailis, who is a team lead with Better Start AIM, will then be presenting the second part of tonight's webinar, which looks specifically at your role in relation to the access and inclusion model. I suppose just to bring you back to Saturday for a moment, on Saturday we had our LINC graduation and another 527 LINC students have become graduates of the programme, which is absolutely amazing. So after 9 years of the LINC programme, we now have over 6,000 graduates, and some of them have taken on the role of inclusion coordinator within their early childhood setting. So tonight's webinar, we want to support those of you who have taken on this important role within your setting, and hopefully we will be able to give you some ideas or some strategies as to what you can do within your role to support yourself as inclusion coordinator. So this evening in my section, we will discuss the role of the inclusion coordinator. We will explore some different case study examples, and then I'll outline what you need to have in order to become an inclusion coordinator. In Ireland, inclusion in early childhood education and care is supported through the Access and Inclusion Model or through AIM. And AIM was introduced back in 2016, so it's almost a decade since AIM was introduced by the then Department of Children and Youth Affairs, now known as the Department of Children, Disability and Equality. And it provides a framework of support to enable all children to fully participate in the ECCE programme. Within this model, the inclusion coordinator, or the INCO, plays a central role and is the person who champions inclusion within their setting. They ensure that inclusive practices are embedded across the daily routine, that educators feel confident in supporting all children in their rooms and in the setting, and that families are supported in their child's learning journey. AIM provides a national framework of supports from training, which comes in at level 1 and level 3, to tailored supports to specialised equipment. However, I suppose it's the role of the inclusion coordinator who connects these supports to the children, to the families. Quite often, the inclusion coordinator is the first person who's telling parents about the access and inclusion model, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So the inclusion coordinator really brings AIM to life in practice, ensuring that every child feels like they can belong and that they can participate in the setting. And later on, Ailis is going to cover that in more detail within her section in terms of the access and inclusion model coming to life in the setting. And I suppose if you didn't already know, the LINC programme and the role of the inclusion coordinator and the inclusion coordinator come in under level 1 of the access and inclusion model. And then Ailis and her colleagues from Better Start come in under level 4 of the access and inclusion model. So that's just to give you a brief understanding of the model if you weren't already aware of it. In terms of understanding your role, I suppose firstly, we'd encourage you to print and to have the role of the inclusion coordinator on display within your setting. So that's a great starting point. If you don't already have a copy of the poster, we'll be sending that via email afterwards. But that's always a great starting point as to have those conversations within your setting as to what your role is, have the poster on display. The role of the inclusion coordinator is a distributed leadership model. So in light of that, your role might look different depending on where you're working. For example, if you're a lead educator or an early years educator working as an inclusion coordinator as well, versus if you're a deputy manager or a manager working as an inclusion coordinator, the roles are going to look quite differently. So I suppose I'd strongly encourage you to have conversations with your manager as to what your role is going to look like within your setting. And another really important part of your role is to make the connections with those key partners. So have you introduced yourself as being the inclusion coordinator of your setting to parents, to other team members, to the Better Start early years specialists to come into your settings, and even to other local professionals such as the local principal of the primary school or members of the CDNT team who you might be collaborating with as well. Perhaps if you haven't introduced yourself to the key partners, maybe over the coming days and coming weeks, that could be something that you look into. That could be a quite nice action for you to take away tonight to introduce yourself and start to make those connections and identify yourself as being the inclusion coordinator within your setting. So here's the role of the inclusion coordinator that I just spoke about. This is a snippet of the poster. And the role of the inclusion coordinator is broken down into 4 key areas. So leading inclusive practice and pedagogy. Then we have the access and inclusion model. Down the bottom corner, we have diversity, equality and inclusion charter and guidelines. And then we have the views of children and parents. And then I suppose just in terms of thinking about your role again and leading inclusive culture, practice and pedagogy, these are 2 key documents that we have on the screen at the moment. So for those of you who have completed LINC, so anyone who ticked A or B in our Menti earlier, engaging in the LINC program and your portfolio was all based around our LINC competency framework, which is more commonly known as, I suppose, the Reflections on Inclusion document. And this is 25 reflective statements divided into 3 categories of inclusive culture, inclusive practice, and inclusive pedagogy. And when thinking about leading inclusion within your setting, this is a great document to have as a starting point. But for those of you who tick C, who haven't completed the LINC program, you could use the Diversity, Equality and Inclusion Charter and Guidelines as your foundation to support you in leading inclusion within your setting. And these 2 documents are going to go hand in hand to help you to lead inclusive culture, practice and pedagogy. Okay, so let's get into the specifics of the role. So as I said, we're divided into 4 core areas. And the first area is looking at leading inclusive pedagogy and practice. These points are very wordy, and the exact wording is on the screen, but I'm going to summarize them a little bit for you. So in leading inclusive practice and pedagogy, it's divided into 6 key points. So the first one looks at lead inclusive practice, pedagogy and culture, supporting staff and parents in line with the Diversity, Equality and Inclusion Charter and Guidelines. Then we have cascading learning to staff to build an inclusive culture. Embedding inclusion in curriculum, assessment, routines and interactions so that all children can fully participate. Model and share good practice in observations, planning, communication, guided by Aistear-Síolta. Engage with national and local inclusion development to strengthen practice. And pursue ongoing CPD to uphold best practice in inclusion and awareness of children's needs. So what could this look like in practice? So here I have some 4 easy, simple ways that you could implement this in your practice. So firstly, in thinking about inclusive audits. So using the aforementioned Reflections on Inclusion document and the Diversity, Equality and Inclusion Charter and Guidelines to audit your environments. To build on that, then you can use the reflective tools that are on the Aistear-Síolta practice guide and using all of these to consider what's working well within your setting and what could be improved. And it's all well and good doing that, but then you need to create action plans and assign team members to help to make those changes within your settings. Okay, so rather than just talking about wouldn't it be great if we put that action plan in place so that you can start to make those changes in terms of inclusion within your setting. The next suggestion then that I have is in terms of partnership with parents. So sharing information on AIM with all parents. AIM can be long-term, it can be more temporary. So having those conversations from those initial meetings that you have with parents about the access and inclusion model can be so powerful in helping to embed AIM and embed inclusive culture, practice and pedagogy within your setting. So having those initial meetings or initial conversations with parents, including information on it in inductions, in your parental information forms, in your handbooks, in your newsletters. So keeping inclusion and AIM on the top of everyone's radar, I suppose, is really powerful. And then speak with your parents that you've completed the LINC program and that you're an inclusion coordinator for your setting and what that looks like. On the screen, we have the inclusion coordinator sticker. So display the INCO sticker with pride within your setting. Then in terms of team meetings, so could inclusion be an agenda item at your team meetings where there's a specific time and space to share information and discuss inclusion. In the busyness of our earlier settings, sometimes it's tricky to have those conversations, but if there is a dedicated space on your agendas to sit down as a team and to discuss inclusion, that can help to make changes as well in your setting and to reinforce inclusive practice. And then mentoring. So could you lead a short mentoring session with your team to help to embed inclusive practices within your setting? This can be further supported with modeling and scaffolding. Also think about any new people who might be starting in your setting. Could you build mentoring and inclusion into your induction so that any new team members starting in your setting are also learning about your inclusive ethos? So just making sure that everyone's starting off as we mean to go on and everyone knows what your setting prioritizes in terms of inclusion. So this is a case study in relation to embedding inclusion. So at ABC Early Childhood Setting, the team are developing inclusive practice in line with the Diversity, Equality and Inclusion Charter and Guidelines, Síolta and Aistear. As part of the inclusion coordinator's role, it is to support the educators in adapting daily routines and play environments so that all children can participate. While outside, some of the educators noticed that Lily, who uses a walking frame, often stays near the classroom door, while the other children run to the sandpit, the climbing area and seating spaces. Some educators worry that some educators worry that Lily's been left out, but are unsure how to adapt the environment. As inclusion coordinator, what advice or support would you give to the educators? So please use the chat box to share your suggestions. Okay, so Anne's saying bring items closer to Lily. Yeah. What else could we do? Sinead's saying put the sandpit at waist level. Use the Aistear tools, Danny's saying. Helen's saying role play. Mary saying having it lower to her height. Ask the children what they want include the family. Have a seating space near the door, have access to the pathways, to the sand and climbing area, make the sandpit elevated to help her access, bring it to her level. Patricia's saying create visual aids so she could point to what she would like to do to make sure that she has a clearer path and bring toys closer. Move items closer to the child. Could Lily suggest what she wants to do? Where she wants to go and small group before everyone gets to her. Sorry, jumped on me there. A story about Lily and what Lily needs. Have all areas accessible? Absolutely, yeah. Lower the level, small group play around the sandpit. Talk to Lily and see what she'd like to do. Scaffolding small interactions, adapt access, yeah. Absolutely. So lots of ideas there on how we can adapt the environment to support Lily. And I'll just give you some of the ideas that we had. So the inclusion coordinator could model. So they could demonstrate how to set up an alternative sand or water station. So similarly to what was mentioned in the chat box. So making that environment, making that space more accessible so that Lily's able to join in. You could support the other educators, so work with the other educators to encourage the other children to come to play at the space while ensuring that the participation feels natural. So as an educator or as an inclusion coordinator, fading in and fading out where required. Reflect after the session, after the session has finished to see what worked well, what could we change. You could also encourage the team to complete an audit of the environment and then include parents. So at handover time, provide feedback to Lily's parents and encourage them to share ideas from Lily's physio or any appointments that she's going to. And then you could also ask for permission to contact the physio, just so that you do have that multidisciplinary approach and collaborative approach to make sure that Lily's getting the support that she needs from all angles, I suppose, within the setting and outside the setting, and that everyone's working together for the best interests of Lily. So thank you so much for the comments that came in. So I put together using mentoring as a simple strategy as well. So here we have a simple way that the inclusion coordinators can use mentoring as a strategy to support the educators and also to support Lily within the setting. So I'm just going to talk it through in terms of the case study that we just looked at. So I'll just get my light again. So up here at the top, we have the inclusion coordinator models practice. So the inclusion coordinator sets up the sand and water play station so that Lily can access with her walking frame. And during outdoor play, the inclusion coordinator demonstrates how to invite Lily to the activity, scaffolds her participation, and encourages her peers to join in. While this is happening, the staff are observing. So while the inclusion coordinator is working with Lily and the group, the other educators watch closely, noting the different strategies that the inclusion coordinator is using, such as adjusting the environment, using encouraging language, and facilitating peer inclusion. Then we have reflect together. So after the play session or after the ECC session, the inclusion coordinator and the educators sit down briefly to discuss: what did you notice about Lily's engagement? How did the other children respond? What worked well today? What could we try to adapt tomorrow? Then the educators try and practice. So the next day, the educators take the lead in setting up and supporting Lily's access to the activity using the strategies that they previously observed. The inclusion coordinator steps back, but is still present to give the educators support if required. And then the inclusion coordinator gives feedback. So the inclusion coordinator observes the educators in action and offers positive feedback and gentle suggestions, such as, I really like how you encouraged Lily to pour the water for herself. What if we added extra materials? How could we support her independence that bit more? And then the final element that we have here then is sharing learning. So both the inclusion coordinator and the team reflect on the experience and they link it to Síolta, Aistear and the Diversity, Equality and Inclusion Charter and Guidelines. They then agree to extend the adaptations to other areas of play so that all children can access activities more fully within the early childhood setting. So hopefully that just gives a nice little example as to how mentoring could look in practice within early childhood settings. So the next area that we're going to have a look at is the inclusion coordinator's role on Diversity, Equality and Inclusion Charter and Guidelines. So this element focuses on the National Inclusion Charter and supporting staff to engage with the revised Charter and Guidelines and completing and regularly reviewing its inclusion policy. So this is a gorgeous poster that hopefully you've seen before, but if not, this is from page 6 of the Diversity, Equality and Inclusion Charter and Guidelines. If you haven't had an opportunity to use this as a team, it could be a lovely visual to add to your setting. So perhaps in your staff room, if you have an inclusion coordinator notice board or an inclusion notice board, this could be a lovely poster to add there. Or you could also discuss this at team meetings when you have that dedicated time and space to discuss about all the different elements of inclusion and what that means to you in your setting. Again, this could be fabulous to share with parents and visitors of your setting. Maybe you could have it on display at your reception area, or maybe you could include it in your parental handbook that you send out to your parents each year. So how else could the Diversity, Equality and Inclusion Charter and Guidelines be implemented in practice? So perhaps team workshops. So maybe some of the team could attend the Diversity, Equality and Inclusion Charter and Guidelines training and cascade learning that they take from the training with the rest of the team. I suppose when it comes to inclusion can't just fall on one person. Other people need to go to training and things like that as well, and so that everyone is learning about inclusion and everyone's bringing back different pieces of their understanding, then that we can all have a holistic understanding of inclusion. So sharing information at the team meetings from other training could be really powerful. As inclusion coordinator, perhaps you might share information of the Diversity, Equality and Inclusion Charter and Guideline trainings that's provided by the county childcare committees. You might share that again on your notice board, or maybe at staff meetings you might share information on that. And then just having those discussions as to how you can apply that new learning to your work. And then as a team, conduct audits of all of your environments to ensure they are inclusive and reflective of all children and families. Okay, so the next point under the Diversity, Equality and Inclusion Charter element is focusing on supporting your setting to complete and regularly review its inclusion policy. So this ensures that your written policies reflect the inclusive practice that you want to see in the daily life within your setting. So start by checking that your setting has an inclusion policy and that the inclusion coordinator is named within it. If you didn't write the policy yourself, familiarise yourself with the policy, and your team should also be familiarised with its content as well. And don't forget about your students or volunteers who are attending your setting. They should also be informed about your policy. Then regularly assess whether your policy aligns with what's actually happening in practice. So involve staff in discussions about any gaps and decide whether the policy needs to be updated or does your practice need to be adjusted. And then have clear review dates, whether annually or as required, to keep the policy up to date and relevant to the children and families that are attending your setting. You could also consider creating child-friendly versions of your inclusion policy using simple languages, visuals, and symbols. And then finally, just consider how you share this policy with your parents and families. It should be shared in a clear and welcoming format, so your family handbooks, your digital formats, and maybe even audio versions for parents who may have literacy difficulties or who might prefer to listen to things rather than reading things. And then once your inclusion policy is updated, review all other policies, such as your behaviour support policies, curriculum policies, admission policies, to ensure that they are inclusive of all children and that inclusion is a constant within your policies. Okay, so then the final element that I'm going to have a chat with you about is in relation to advocating on behalf of children and engaging in regular consultation with both children and families. So some simple ways that you can advocate on behalf of children include the child's voice in planning. So include children's choices, agencies and ideas in the curriculum planning through conversations, drawings, photos. So some of those I notice boards. Having listening spaces for children. So create child-friendly ways for children to express their opinions. Idea boxes, visual choice boards. If some of your children use AAC devices, having all those readily available that you can capture as many voices in the ways that suit the children best. Then parental consultation. So holding regular check-ins, surveys or informal chats with parents to gather feedback on inclusion and learning experiences. And then advocacy and action. So speaking up for children who have extra needs during external agency meetings or when resources are being allocated to children. And then finally, a collaborative policy review. So involving both children and parents in reviewing parts of the inclusion policy at levels which are appropriate to them are another way of capturing the views of children and families. So the final slide then that I have before I hand over to Eilis is in relation to what you need to be an inclusion coordinator, because I'm aware that not everyone here tonight is an inclusion coordinator. So to be an inclusion coordinator, firstly, you need to have completed the LINC program. And then once you complete the LINC program, your student ID becomes your graduate ID. And your manager uses your graduate ID to register you as an inclusion coordinator on Hive. And this means that the additional capitation of €2 per ECC child per week can be claimed. Managers need to apply annually for the inclusion coordinator capitation, so make sure you keep note of your student ID, which becomes your graduate ID. So you also need to sign an inclusion declaration, an INCO declaration and a consent form. So this form asks for your setting details, your details as inclusion coordinator, that you are employed and working as an inclusion coordinator within the setting. And by signing this document, it states that you are taking on the role of the inclusion coordinator and that you're agreeing to take on the roles and responsibilities associated with the position. So then once you have all of these, your manager then logs into Hive and they register you as an inclusion coordinator on Hive. So without further ado, I am going to stop sharing and I am going to hand over to Eilis.
So thanks a million, Claire and Helena, for having me this evening. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. So again, my name is Ailis Lothian and I'm of course the team leader with the Access and Inclusion, or AIM model within Better Start. So I suppose this evening we're going to explore the following with myself. We're going to briefly take a look at what Better Start actually is and what the role of Better Start is. We'll then have a look at the AIM model in detail. We'll explore both its universal and targeted levels. We are going to have a look at mentoring and your role specifically as an INCO or an inclusion coordinator, and we'll also explore the concept of inclusion and how it relates to our practice in terms of the updated Aistear framework and the Aistear-Síolta practice guide. And then finally, we'll have a look at the role of the inclusion coordinator or INCO and how the INCO can work effectively with the Better Start Early Years Specialist or EYS. So definitely lots to keep us going for the next little while. So I suppose firstly, looking at Better Start, we'll take a look at the role of Better Start. Better Start is a national initiative that promotes quality and enhances inclusion in early learning and care settings for children that are aged birth to 6. Better Start supports professional development in the early learning and care sector through its provision of mentoring and coaching supports, and they are based on both the Aistear curriculum and the Síolta quality frameworks. And Better Start's strengths-based approach is all about valuing everyone equally and really building on a person's skills and abilities. I suppose it's really important also to have a look at Better Start's philosophy and approach, and that is based on a number of really important principles. Of course, children at the centre always of our approach and our practice, a strengths-based approach that's person-centred and focuses on supporting an individual's innate skills, their talents, their own knowledge, and it's all about empowering them in their provision of high-quality, inclusive pedagogical practice, respectful partnerships and collaborations, evidence-based practice, as well as continuous quality improvement, inclusion for all children, continuous professional development is also really important. We are focused on best outcomes for children, and of course the engagement with all of our services is voluntary. And Better Start does offer 3 operational programs that you might actually be familiar with from your own practice. So we'll have a quick look at these, and then we'll have a deeper focus on the AIM model itself. So as I've just mentioned, Better Start offers 3 programs or 3 strands, the first of which is the Quality Development or QDS service. And the QDS service provides mentoring and coaching to ELC settings catering for children from birth to 6 years old, so that those settings are of high quality and deliver positive outcomes for children. Any ELC setting can request support from the QDS service, and after which they'll be put in touch with the QDS or Quality Development Service Early Years Specialist or EYS. We have, of course, then the Access and Inclusion or AIM model, and the AIM model provides a progressive model of both universal and targeted supports that help individual children with additional care and support needs to access and participate in their local ELC setting. And the AIM EYS provides that targeted support, just as Claire has mentioned earlier on. And that's through the provision of mentoring and coaching. And we'll be exploring this in a little more detail as well throughout this evening. And then last but not least, we have our Learning and Development Unit, or our L&D unit. And our L&D unit will coordinate the delivery of an agreed programme of CPD or continuous professional development opportunities. Again, you may have completed some of these, you might be doing them right now, or you might be familiar with them. But that includes hand and teacher talk, love, sensory processing and early learning or spell training, and then the National Síolta and Aistear Initiative or NSAI. Okay, so looking at the AIM model itself, we're going to have a look at that in a little more detail. The AIM model is it's a model of supports designed to promote inclusion and to ensure that children with additional care or support needs can meaningfully participate in their early learning and care setting. Quality early learning and care experiences for young children are at the very centre of the model, and AIM aspires to support educators to create a more inclusive culture in their settings to support all children to be able to meaningfully access and participate. AIM, of course, is a child-centred model. It offers a range of universal supports for the wider sector, and then those targeted supports for individual children, which focuses on the strengths, the interests and areas of required support for the child. And as an INCO, the universal and targeted levels of the model can support you in leading inclusive practice and pedagogy. Again, just to note, AIM itself is based on a number of really important principles. That includes equal access for all children to those supports, particularly those targeted supports, but of course to the universal supports as well, regardless of their location in the country. The application for targeted supports, so from level 4 onwards, is done jointly by the child's parent or guardian and the preschool setting. So for example, with yourself as the INCO possibly. So as an INCO working in partnership with parents or guardians to both disseminate and provide information on the AIM model and also to support the application process as a core part of the role, but it's also really, really important in terms of leading that inclusive practice and pedagogy. Again, access to the targeted supports, so again from levels 4 to 7, does not require a formal diagnosis of disability. So a child does not require a diagnosis maybe from their CDNT team, for example, to access supports. They just need to be age eligible in terms of being eligible for the ECC programme. AIM provides an individualised response then that's tailored to the needs of both the child and the ELC setting as well. But I suppose when we think about it, what does access and inclusion actually mean? So again, we can see it on the slide there, but when AIM mentions access, it refers to the child's ability to actually attend their local ELC setting. So supporting access includes removing barriers and advocating for the individual needs of the child. Inclusion then refers to the child's ability to participate as fully and as actively as possible in their preschool setting. And again, really having those meaningful early childhood experiences that we know means so much to their later development. We'll now take a look at each of the universal and targeted levels of the model in more detail. I know Claire has touched on them earlier on this evening, so it's just good we can have a look at them in a little more detail as well. So again, we can see AIM's universal supports. They are on the left-hand side of the slide from levels 1 to 3, and universal supports aim to enable providers to foster greater inclusivity in their ELC setting. So when we look at level 1 all the way over on the left-hand side, again, that focuses on building an inclusive culture in early learning and care settings through staff training and continuous professional development, or CPD opportunities. These CPD opportunities include the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion, or EDI training, which supports providers to develop their own inclusion charter, and of course the Leadership for Inclusion in Early Years Care, or the LINC programme, of course. And again, as we know, graduates of LINC can become inclusion coordinators or INCOs in their settings. Level 2 then provides clear, accurate and up-to-date information for parents and guardians in ELC settings on AIM. This information is provided through the AIM website, and that's www.aim.gov.ie, and Helena has shared it in the chat. And that acts as a central resource providing information on the model's different supports, so the different levels, and the application processes, information on AIM policy and rules, and details regarding supporting access and inclusion in early learning and care. And the AIM website can be used by the INCO to support maybe that conversation with parents or guardians on the AIM model. So again, even maybe, for example, if you are disseminating or providing information to parents or guardians on the model, it can be really nice to have that there beside you there just to refer back to really support that conversation. And this can ensure that you're providing them with the most up-to-date information on the model, as well as best practice approaches to applications. So, for example, that ensuring that the application is made jointly, for example. And then we have a look at level 3 then, which focuses on building a qualified and confident workforce by providing access to 3 CPD courses that focus on upskilling specifically in the areas of inclusion and understanding different developmental needs. And again, you may be familiar with them. I briefly mentioned them earlier on. We have Hanan Teacher Talk, which supports educators by helping them to empower young children to develop language and literacy skills. Love, which is a manual sign language system used by children and adults with communication needs. And then, of course, our Speller, or sensory processing and early learning. This helps providers and educators to support children with sensory processing differences. As an INCO, these CPD opportunities can really build on your existing knowledge to support the provision of your leadership in your setting in relation to diversity, equality and inclusion. But equally, you know, if you aren't in the role of the INCO currently, they can be just a really good opportunity to expand and extend your own knowledge base as well. Okay, so moving in then to the more targeted levels over to the right-hand side of the screen. From levels 4 over to 7. The purpose of the targeted levels is to cater to a wide range of abilities, and they're focused on the needs of the child. So whereas the levels 1 to 3 are more universal in that they're very much supports for the wider sector, levels 4 to 7 really focus on supporting the child. So level 4, that provides expert early years education and advice and support for early learning and care settings, and that's delivered by the AIM Early Years Specialist or EYS. So the AIM EYS works collaboratively with parents or guardians, ELC settings, INCOs and other professionals to foster inclusive learning environments and settings. The EYS offers coaching and mentoring to educators on supporting preschool age children, which includes the development of an access and inclusion plan, again called My Inclusion Plan. You may be very familiar with this in your practice. I know the Voice of the Child page is one that we particularly all really love to use in our practice. And the purpose of the My Inclusion Plan is to identify any additional supports or resources needed for each child. And so even I suppose to think about goals and strategies and really support the reflection and implementation of them as well. And the EYS can also work in partnership with preschool settings to support a child's transition to primary school when that time comes. As an INCO, you are a key contact at level 4 in terms of collaborating with the EYS to gain educational advice and support. And the INCO role also includes sharing this advice with your colleagues to ensure that consistent support for the child as well. So under level 5 then, equipment, appliances and capital grants towards minor building alterations are available to support and ensure a child's meaningful participation in the setting, and they can be applied for again in partnership with the health professional from the HSE, such as a speech and language therapist or an occupational therapist, for example. Level 6 of the model, as we move over to the right-hand side of the slide, can be explored when therapeutic intervention may be required to really further support the child's access and inclusion. And under level 6 of the model, the EYS can seek therapeutic advice and support from our colleagues within the HSE. So, for example, within a Children's Disability Network team or CDNT team, for example. And this is all about regarding best practice to foster the child's inclusion. And level 6 of the model may be considered by the EYS when strategies, coaching and mentoring have been explored in the first instance under level 4. And again, this is done in partnership with the child's parents or guardians, and then the preschool setting or use the INCO, for example, from the preschool setting. And again, as an INCO, you may also be the link between HSE colleagues and your own colleagues in the setting. And I know Claire has touched on this earlier as well. So it's really about looking at that multidisciplinary approach in terms of supporting the child's inclusion. Finally, we have our level 7 support, and this can provide funding to support a preschool setting to hire an additional educator as a shared resource with other children in the session, or to maintain a reduced ratio. And the EYS will use the information they gather as they process the AIM application to make this decision. Just always really important to note in recognition of research in this area, this additional support is designed to improve inclusion and ensure meaningful participation of all children in the room through the provision of a lower adult-to-child ratio if it is required. So a lower adult-to-child ratio than what would be required from the TUSA regulations. AIM level 7 works in partnership with AIM level 4, and I suppose the level 7 support is very different to maybe the special needs assistant model or the SNA model, which targets supports more at each individual child. Level 7 funding may not always be required to foster a child's meaningful inclusion in the preschool setting, and I suppose that's the purpose of the graphic and the actual illustration of the AIM model. We can see that it tends to taper off as we get into the more targeted levels of the model. Whilst an application for a child under AIM will always result in the allocation of level 4 support, again through the EYS service, other additional levels of the model may be more suited in supporting and meeting the needs of the child. So even, for example, like level 5 equipment. So again, it's just always really important to consider that as well when you are sharing information about the model too. The Hive then, of course, contains a number of useful guides that can be really helpful in your role and really kind of assist and support you in applying for supports under the model. Okay, so I suppose then we are going to have a little look now at the actual word mentoring and what do we mean by mentoring. Mentoring has been referred to a number of times so far this evening, but again, what does it actually mean in practice? Before we further explore mentoring and the role of the INCO, just want to ask us, well, does anyone have experience before in working with a mentor, even in your practice or maybe in, I don't know, football, for example? You might have an experience. If anybody wants to share, you're very welcome to pop them into the chat. As an INCO, your role is to lead inclusive practice within your preschool setting, providing support and information to your colleagues. And again, as Claire explored earlier on this evening, the INCO role and the INCO also mentors your fellow educators to create inclusive learning environments in both the indoor and outdoor areas of your setting, for example. And I think Claire's case study from earlier this evening, exploring how Lily could be supported, really illustrated the INCO's mentoring role in action, and it really illustrated then the difference that can make too. I suppose to build on the concept of mentoring further and how it relates to the INCO role, let's explore how Better Start refers to mentoring. So I suppose when we think of mentoring ourselves from a Better Start perspective, let's look at that to help us to support us to further understand mentoring as it relates to our practice. So I suppose then Better Start refers to mentoring as a supportive, relationship-based learning process between an early years educator and an early years specialist, a commitment of both parties to quality early childhood education, and the process is reflective, strengths-based and tailored to the individual context of each early year setting. Okay, so as an INCO, you mentor your colleagues. And you do this by sharing your expertise, guiding them in developing inclusive approaches, helping them build skills for working with children and families with additional care and support needs. And the INCO also supports staff development. Again, you foster that collaborative learning, and you can act as a central contact as well. So for example, when linking in with the EYS, the INCO leads on diversity, advocating for children, partnering with families and professionals, and really helping to implement inclusive practices. So the INCO role is something that can have a really profound effect, and you really can lead and support and inclusion in your preschool setting. Mentoring in your role as an INCO is empowered by both the commitment to the whole setting, the whole ELC setting, to quality early childhood education, and again, use of that reflective dialogue and reflection on practice. And we will revisit the role of the INCO when we meet Ellie, our INCO, later on in the webinar. We'll now explore the concept of inclusion and how it relates to our practice in terms of the updated Aistear framework and the Aistear-Síolta practice guide. Okay, so before we take a look at Aistear, let's take a moment to explore the concept of inclusion, or the topic of inclusion. And again, you're very welcome to pop your answers or your thoughts into the chat box there. So I suppose, what does inclusion mean to you? Catherine has popped in: provide support and plan, encourage reflective practice, share knowledge. Yeah. We have Patricia making sure all children have opportunities for learning, Donna being an advocate for children, Sheila all involved and accepted, Jane to fully participate and support. Thank you. Lots of lovely answers coming in. My chat is jumping here. Help for family and the child from Helen. Thank you so much. Mary, everyone included. Nicole, giving children equal learning opportunities. And we have Charlene, including everyone, supporting. Absolutely, yeah. And I think, again, inclusion is it's a concept that's really personal to us, but I think we really are really leading. I think when we are really providing some lovely examples here in the chat too, in terms of what it actually means to ourselves. I suppose then when we think about the topic of inclusion, we think about our Aistear framework, and Aistear's 9 principles form the basis of the framework itself, and they really help to realise the curriculum's vision, which is of course to support every baby, toddler and young child to thrive, recognising them as capable, confident and able to make choices about their own learning, whilst also respecting their rights, interests, needs and strengths. So let's use the Aistear curriculum framework to explore the concept of inclusion specifically. And as we can see on the slide there, one of the 9 principles of Aistear emphasises the importance of diversity, equity and inclusion from the perspective of a rights-based approach. So according to this principle, diversity, equity and inclusion recognises that every baby, toddler and young child deserves equal opportunities and fair treatment, free from discrimination. They should be able to access and actively participate. Apologies, I'm just after losing that there. They should be able to access and actively participate in experiences that help them reach their full potential as little people and as individuals. Equity in early childhood then means ensuring fairness when addressing any challenges children may face due to their background or abilities, and we respect and celebrate the diversity of each child's identity, family, home and community, whilst also recognising and appreciating our shared connection. Inclusion then ensures that all babies, toddlers and young children are supported, empowered and given the chance to engage and grow through meaningful early childhood experiences. And that again is the principle of diversity, equity and inclusion as listed in our updated Aistear curriculum. I suppose in Aistear, this principle again is interpreted from the perspective of babies, toddlers and young children. And I have two quotations here. I'm just going to read them out. They are taken directly from the Aistear principle of diversity, equity and inclusion. And again, it's just to keep them in mind as we move into our next slide as well. But the first one here is recognise my abilities, identities, needs and individual potential and respect my right to belong in the learning environment. Put supports in place so that I'm empowered to participate and contribute in a meaningful way. And we have the other interpretation. There's many interpretations within Aistear, but these two particularly spoke to me. My family, cultural, home languages and ethnicity are what make me who I am. Acknowledge and respect me, celebrate appropriately and value me, my family and my community. So as an INCO, you can use resources such as the Aistear curriculum, the guidance for good practice, again, which if you do have the updated Aistear, they're both very much copied together and tethered together, which is really good. And the Aistear-Síolta practice guide to support you in providing leadership within your setting in relation to topics of diversity, equality and inclusion. And again, high quality practice underpins inclusion. And I think that's really something that's so important for all of us to really keep in mind. The guidance for good practice supports educators and INCOs, of course, to understand and engage with the vision, principles and themes of the updated Aistear framework. And this is similar to the guidelines for good practice, which accompanied the 2009 version of Aistear. So it's just been updated slightly in terms of its title as well. The Aistear-Síolta practice guide then, that actually draws Síolta and Aistear together in a very practical way. It offers suggestions, ideas, examples, so like the video, for example, of how both the Síolta Quality Framework and the Aistear Curriculum Framework can be used together to inform the learning and development of babies, toddlers and young children. And the Aistear-Síolta Practice Guide, it is over on the Nurture and Skills website now, so it has its new home, I think, since May or June of this year. It is an online resource, and again, there are lots of resources that can be printed, videos, lots of really lovely bits and pieces to support you in your practice as well. One of the 6 pillars of practice of the updated Aistear-Síolta Practice Guide is all about nurturing relationships and interactions. And this pillar of practice supports us to reflect on how educators can nurture responsive relationships and interactions in their setting. Resources then contained in the practice guide, they include, for example, the self-evaluation tools, and they're really practical supports that you can use in your role as an INCO or indeed as an educator. The self-evaluation tools they tend to follow the same format. They're broken down into different elements, and each element has a series of statements. So you might even just focus on one element, for example. And this could be the nurturing early friendships, which is a brand new piece that's been added since Aistear has been updated and the practice guide has been updated. The nurturing early friendships is one that's been added, and it's a really, really lovely one because, again, it really supports us to focus on, again, children making connections with one another in their earliest years. And as an INCO, you may wish to use the self-evaluation tool to explore how your setting currently supports children to form connections with one another, for example. And the statements are really helpful to provoke further thought and reflection on your practice. And even if you're going through the self-evaluation tools, there could be just that one statement that really sticks with you or really remains with you. And that could be your starting point, or that could be something that you really wish to focus on as well. Similarly, the pillar on creating inclusive learning environments also contains a self-evaluation tool, which can support the reflection on how you can plan and organise the inclusive learning environment. So I suppose if we think about Claire's example earlier on with Lily and how the educators and the INCO were going to support Lily in terms of her inclusion, that could be an opportunity to maybe break out the self-evaluation tool about the planning and organising the inclusive learning environment. Again, it's just to really jog suggestions, jog ideas, and really help you along your reflective journey as well. So far this evening, we have explored the role of Better Start, and we've explored the AIM model in more detail. We've discussed mentoring and your role as an INCO, and we've also just explored the concept of inclusion and how it relates to our practice in terms of documentation and policy, such as the updated Aistear framework and the Aistear-Síolta practice guide. We are now going to take a deeper look at the role of the INCO and how the INCO can effectively work with the Better Start early years specialist as well. Okay, so I'm going to introduce you all to Ellie. So this is our inclusion coordinator. So Ellie has recently completed LINC and she's just undertaken the role of the inclusion coordinator in her setting. So Ellie has 5 years of experience working in a full daycare setting. So we're going to call it Ladybugs, that cares for children from the age of 1 right up to school age. Ellie will undertake the dual role of educator in INCO, so she's going to continue working in the preschool in the ECC session in the mornings. So your setting, it may be similar to Ladybugs, or you might be a sessional only or a part-time daycare setting. So it's just really important to think about, I suppose, the following case study and the following ideas within the context of your own individual setting as well. So we can see from the slide that an inclusive culture is really important in Ladybugs, and Ellie is really eager to ensure that this vision remains part of Ladybugs' ethos as an inclusive ELC setting. And Ellie's also eager to embrace her role as an INCO, but she does have some questions about how she can navigate it effectively. So let's see how Ellie can promote inclusion in Ladybugs in her role as an INCO. So Ellie has some questions about effective collaboration. So she recognises the importance of working with parents and guardians, external professionals such as a speech and language therapist or occupational therapist, and the EYS from both the QDS Quality Development Service or the AIM model within Better Start, and of course her fellow colleagues and educators. And she really would like to be a leader for this multidisciplinary approach within her setting as the INCO. Again, Ellie also has some questions about training and resources, and she is really aware of the benefits of ongoing CPD, but she's a little unsure of where to start with regards to the specific training that would be beneficial in supporting her in her INCO role. There is lots and lots of opportunities for training in CPD out there, so Ellie just has a couple of questions about where she could start. So she does decide to meet with her manager, and they define some goals that they can work towards. So Ellie will work slowly on the implementation of these goals, say over the duration of the coming year, for example. So again, when we think of our updated Aistear, we have our concept of that slow relational pedagogy. Ellie's also going to undertake a slow relational pedagogy with regards to her role as the INCO. It's really important that she doesn't take on too much, or she doesn't try to really, make lots and lots of changes within a small space of time. It's something that's very important, that's ongoing. She can reflect on change, she can plan her change, and it's something that she can do and really take her time with as well. She again is going to plan to reflect on them with her manager during her support and supervision as well. So I suppose we'll have a quick look at the 4 areas of focus that Ellie and her manager have decided or identified. That first one is all about inclusive policies. So Ellie decides to review the inclusion coordinator role poster. So again, that's been previously discussed by Claire this evening. She reflects on the 4 main INCO responsibilities and how they relate to her work. She feels confident about including the views of children and parents, but she does want to learn more about the access and inclusion model. So we'll explore this in a little more detail on the next couple of slides. As Ellie also reviews her settings inclusion policy, charter and service ethos, and she adds the following quote from the Diversity, Equality and Inclusion Charter and Guidelines to the policy. Participation in inclusive, high-quality early childhood settings enhances all children's early learning experiences. In an inclusive setting, there's an awareness and respect for each child's individual strengths. Inclusive settings engage in meaningful collaboration with parents and guardians and other professionals to ensure access, equality and full participation for all children. And Ellie and her manager decide together to include a piece on the INCO role in future team meetings to keep all educators informed and updated of Ellie's work within her INCO role. So even, for example, it's a great opportunity at a team meeting to really discuss the quotation that maybe has been added to the inclusion policy and really support all educators across the setting to really understand that and really align their own practice with that too. Ellie also wants to think about how can I be an effective INCO. So she's mostly worked with preschool age children at Ladybugs, and she is familiarising herself with the updated Aistear curriculum framework at the moment, including its 9 principles, such as the principle of diversity, equity and inclusion that we've explored earlier, and also the principle of agentic global citizens, which describes how babies, toddlers and young children can be empowered to make choices and decisions for themselves. So she discusses with her manager about spending time with other age groups to get to know them. So she does plan to spend time in each room every week, and she hopes to mentor her colleagues as she grows in her INCO role. And again, if we take Claire's case studies on how Lily was supported, this is the mentoring role that Ellie aspires to. Again, she aims to use that slow relational pedagogy in both her approach to the INCO role, but also in her approach to spending time in each of the different rooms in her setting. She's going to focus on being present and responding to each child's needs. Ellie will work with each educator team to plan and set goals for her time in each room, assisting her fellow educators in applying inclusive approaches to curriculum planning, regularly reviewing the learning environment and routines, for example, different activities and social interactions to ensure children of all abilities and backgrounds can participate appropriately in both those individual and group activities. Ellie also has prior experience with the AIM model from the preschool room, and she will act as the main contact for AIM within her INCO role moving forward. She prepares questions for the EYS to clarify the model, especially its targeted levels, and she checks with her local CCC about any upcoming AIM sessions or information sessions on the AIM model that the CCC might have planned with Better Start as well. So the third of four goals then looks at collaboration and collaboration to lead inclusion. So Ellie can enrol for communities of professional practice for recent LINC graduates through LINC Plus, for example. And she also decides to work with her colleagues in the setting, as much like Ellie, they are really getting to know the updated Aistear curriculum framework at the moment. Ellie wishes to inspire her colleagues, facilitating and supporting opportunities for reflective practice and research and encouraging appropriate practice. And Ellie explores the Nurturing Skills Hub. So she familiarises herself with the resources available. So say, for example, on the Aistear-Síolta practice guide that we've discussed earlier on. And she also uses a reflective exercise from the Curriculum Foundation section of the practice guide. And that's very much the starting point of the practice guide. So again, if you wanted to have a look at that over the next few weeks yourself, the Curriculum Foundations is a really lovely place to start with the practice guide. Curriculum foundations are rooted in the principles, values and attitudes that shape each early years educators' work with babies, toddlers and young children. And it's a really lovely opportunity to really reflect and really think about, what is my own practice? What is my own pedagogical practice approach? In doing this, Ellie is empowering her colleagues to reflect on their own pedagogical practice, whilst also supporting them to create their own professional development plan. And Ellie's manager will incorporate this plan into each educator's own support and supervision meeting. So again, it's a really long-term piece, a really lovely opportunity for reflection and reflective dialogue as well. This provides Ellie and her colleagues then with the opportunity to exchange knowledge and effective practices and observation, documentation and curriculum development, for example, demonstrating high quality practice and using various opportunities to collaborate together as well. And then the fourth goal, or the fourth area that Ellie looks at or identifies, is all about training and CPD opportunities. So we did mention earlier on that she is a little unsure of where to go or what training opportunities to undertake. She does spend time on the Nurturing Skills Hub, on the Learning Hub, to understand the training courses that are available, particularly under level 3 of the AIM model, because I suppose these are specifically related to the area of inclusion and understanding different developmental needs. So she does discuss with the educators, I suppose, and with her manager about those courses and what they would like to complete, and the educators can be enrolled on the Nurturing Skills Hub as well. And this includes maybe for courses such as the hand and teacher talk or the spell training, the sensory processing and early learning. Ellie also decides that she'll speak with her manager about contacting the local CCC to see if there's any diversity, equality and inclusion training sessions available, as there are some new educators that have recently joined the team as well. So just, I suppose I've mentioned the Nurturing Skills Hub a couple of times. This is just for your own information. You might be very familiar with the Nurturing Skills Hub already. But again, I do have some information available on registering and accessing the courses on the Nurturing Skills Hub. So you must have an account on the Nurturing Skills Learning Hub, and the primary authorised user on Hive begins the registration process, and they do that by submitting the name, the personal email and phone numbers of each educator. Each learner must have an email account that's personal to them. So again, a kind of a blanket email or a work email, it unfortunately won't work for multiple people. I suppose a link then to register for a new account can be found on the Early Years Hive, and it is illustrated on the slide there under resources and help and support. And if you have completed a course through the old learning management system previously, so maybe before the Nurturing Skills website was launched, you can now log into your account via the Nurturing Skills website as well. But there is an email address there. We have professionaldevelopment@betterstart.ie if you have any questions or queries with regards to the Nurturing Skills Hub as well. Okay, so I suppose then we're going to have a look at more specifically at AIM and the INCO working together, the EYS and the INCO working together. And as discussed in the previous slides, Ellie will act as the main contact for the AIM model within her role as the INCO. So she considers what working in partnership with AIM includes, and that could include, again, active collaboration, submitting applications for AIM support, facilitating communication between the EYS and the educators, and then things like documentation such as the My Inclusion Plan document as well. So I suppose Ellie first decides that she's going to contact the EYS that's been working with the Ladybugs for the last number of years to inform them that she's recently undertaken the role of the INCO. And she'll also inform the EYS that she'll continue working in the ECC session in the morning, and she will support communication between the EYS and other members of the team in the preschool session. So Ellie and the EYS, they put their heads together and they plan how they're going to work together over the next few months. So they also then plan to review the educational advice and mentoring agreement together as well as part of the provision of level 4 support. So Ellie and the EYS agree that the EYS and INCO will communicate directly regarding all aspects of the AIM programme and the needs of the individual child or children applying for AIM support. The EYS will make initial links with healthcare professionals, supporting the INCO to build capacity for linking in with healthcare professionals as necessary. The EYS and the INCO, they will work together to identify goals and implement relevant strategies for the child's meaningful participation through that modelling and mentoring under level 4 of the model. And the EYS will share information on the My Inclusion Plan document for the individual child. And then the INCO will work directly with educators on completing that plan. So they will very much support the longer term approach or the longer term work on the My Inclusion Plan. The EYS will support the INCO to explore and model inclusion strategies to all educators in the ECC room. And the EYS will also encourage the INCO to share all relevant information with parents, management and educators working in the room as well. I suppose when we think about then the dissemination or the provision of information on AIM, from taking time to review the roles and responsibilities of the INCO, Ellie understands the importance of disseminating information on AIM to parents and guardians. So she decides that in this month's newsletter, she's going to include some information for parents and guardians on the model. She includes some information and links to the AIM website, as well as encouraging parents or guardians to link in if they wish to find out more information for the model as well. And I suppose she does this, and after the newsletter goes out, a parent actually contacts the preschool setting to seek some further information on the supports available under the AIM model. Tommy has recently started attending preschool in Ladybugs, and he, again, absolutely adores playing outside in the outdoor area in the garden. And Tommy's mum shared that she feels some of the supports offered under the targeted levels of AIM would be really beneficial for Tommy, who's just recently started attending speech and language therapy in his local primary care centre. Ellie decides to use the information available under level 2 of the AIM model to provide Tommy's mum with information on the model, and they discuss both the universal and targeted supports offered by AIM, with Tommy's mum given the opportunity to ask questions. Ellie noted if Tommy's mum wishes to apply for AIM supports, they can absolutely arrange a time to meet together. And Mum decides that she would actually like to apply for AIM support. So I suppose Ellie, in partnership with Tommy's mum, they agree to apply for targeted supports under AIM. Ellie explains that level 4 support will be applied for in the first instance through the application process, and should further support such as level 7 or level 6, for example, be required, this will be discussed with the EYS to ensure that the most appropriate supports are in place under the model under those targeted levels. So they both meet in a private space within Ladybugs to complete the access and inclusion profile together, and that focuses on Tommy's strengths, his interests and his support needs. Tommy's mum was also interested in his speech and language therapist working directly with educators in Ladybugs too. She's been given some goals and strategies to complete at home, but she would really like to explore if these could be introduced into Tommy's day in preschool too. So Ellie and Tommy's mum review and consent to the application. And just to note, there are both paper-based and online options for the consent too, which is called the AIM application acknowledgement. And Ellie supports Tommy's mum through the application process, answering her questions as they arise. And after submitting the application, the EYS will contact Ellie to follow up. So once the EYS has contacted Ellie in response to Tommy's application, it was decided that level 4 support in the first instance will be explored. An on-site visit to Ladybugs is planned for observation, for mentoring and review of the educational advice and mentoring agreement, which outlines the roles and responsibilities of both the EYS and also the INCO as well. And I suppose the educational advice and mentoring agreement can really reflect on how support will be planned for and provided under the targeted levels of the model. So it can be a really nice document to really set the scene. Mentoring will focus on Tommy's access, participation and support needs using the national framework such as Aistear and the Aistear-Síolta practice guide, and of course information from Tommy's speech and language therapist to inform goal setting as well. So again, that's really linking into our multidisciplinary approach. As part of the mentoring and coaching, the EYS considers 3 core elements to promote quality and inclusion for Tommy. So that's his access, his participation and his support needs. And the EYS works collaboratively with ELC settings, parents and guardians and health professionals. And an on-site visit is scheduled for the following month where the EYS will attend with Tommy's speech and language therapist from primary care. Ellie works with the EYS to develop an access and inclusion plan for Tommy, so again called My Inclusion Plan document. And Ellie and the educators will reflect upon and review this document throughout Tommy's ECC year. The plan will assist the INCO, educators and EYS with planning for Tommy's full inclusion into ECCE with the specific goals set for supporting Tommy noted in the plan. And Ellie regularly shares the plan with the educators in the room, and she does feedback to Tommy's mum as well, just to really keep the lines of communication open. And Ellie also decides that she will meet with the educators in Tommy's session after the EYS's visit to provide them with an overview of the My Inclusion Plan document and the strategies and goals that were suggested to support Tommy. So Ellie is really keen to work with her colleagues in partnership as she understands that working together in this way will support the consistent approach to Tommy's inclusion. Okay, so again, when we think about it, just before we finish up, has anybody any ideas or suggestions about the next steps? What could be the next steps when we think about supporting Tommy on that longer term basis and for the duration of his preschool year?
I suppose, Ailis, really that open communication with speech and language therapists, with the parents, with the EYS, like making sure that everyone is talking to each other, that everyone's doing similar, to ensure consistency for Tommy.
Absolutely, thanks, Claire. Yeah, I think that's really important too. Again, it's that consistent approach to supporting his inclusion and really building on, again, the strategies. Maybe the speech and language therapist might have some strategies that they can really build on that. There are some answers coming into the chat. Again, it was just really thinking about what are the next steps, or what could be the next steps, I suppose, maybe after that initial visit when the EYS has come out and maybe some goals and strategies have been established. So we have, again, continually observed changes, making sure that there's always a line of communication with parents and other services. Absolutely, it's that real multidisciplinary approach. Staff meeting to discuss Tommy and the assistance he'll need. Absolutely, yeah, that's brilliant. Supporting Tommy by the team understanding what supports he needs. I think that's really important. Copying parents on the goal records. Yes, absolutely, Martina. I think that's really important too. Tommy's key worker and doing training on speech and language development to gain better knowledge to help him going forward. Absolutely, Charlene. And that could be where maybe Hannah and Teacher Talk comes in, that training available under level 3 of the model. That could be a really, really useful piece for Ellie and maybe some of her educators in the room to take part in. Continue to set and review goals made for him. Absolutely, I think it's that piece around the long-term piece, I suppose, and kind of reviewing things consistently and periodically. Multidisciplinary teams are vital to support Tommy. Absolutely, thanks a million. Keeping staff up to date with CPD, keeping lines of communication open with the family and reviewing everything as you go on. Absolutely. Reflection on practice, yeah, preparing for transitions, everyone on the same page, staff support, goal, parent communication with the goals. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. There's so many really, really amazing ideas coming in here. And I think really, really great ideas from practice too. Yeah, absolutely. Good diary, quarterly meetings, good communication with the parents. Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you so much, everybody. So again, it's really thinking about, I suppose, those next steps. And I suppose we always have that initial visit, but again, it's that follow-up piece. And as the INCO, again, you have a really vital role to play in that, and you can have a really vital role to play in that as well.
Perfect. We will leave it there. And thank you so much to everyone for joining us this evening.